Ford, Disney, Marriott, Heinz, Estee Lauder. You recognize all these names, but do you know what they all have in common? Well, they're all names of companies that started out as family businesses. And to a certain degree, they still have those families involved in the businesses. Some family-started companies go public, so they may not technically be family businesses anymore, but they still often have family representatives who own significant stakes in those companies, and often the board of directors wants the blessings of these family members in decisions. While we don't have any official aristocracy in the United States, we do have our business versions of royal families. They're the families who built the infrastructure of our country. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Morgans. There are the families who created popular culture, like the Disneys, the Hefners, the Jacksons. There are the families who made the materials and consumer products that we use every day, the Procter & Gamble, the Cokes, the DuPonts. In earlier lectures, I cautioned you a few times about the risk of starting family businesses. Things can go wrong. We can make bad business decisions for good family reasons. Relationships can be strained or even ruined forever. But the fact remains, many people like the idea of a family business, and family businesses have great potential to succeed if you do it right. In today's lecture, we're going to take a closer look at family business. We're going to weigh out the pros and the cons to starting a family business, and I'll give you some practical advice on how to avoid some of those common pitfalls. I'll even share my own personal story of being involved in my family's business to highlight how it actually works. And it's a very important topic because so many great businesses started out by a family working together to make big changes in the world. It's a great thing. So let's see how we might be able to make it work. So, just what is it about family businesses that make them so successful? What are the reasons why starting a family business might just be a good idea? Well, entrepreneurship scholars spend a lot of time thinking about these questions because family businesses have created a lot of wealth and a lot of jobs in this country. We'd like to see more family businesses do well. I mean, that would be good for all of us, right? Well, can we expect to see this? Sure, because the chief reason for family business success is that they usually have a long-term orientation. A long-term orientation happens because the family has personally invested their own money, their own sweat, and their own reputation on that business. They know what went into building it, and they don't want to see it fall apart. Now, you might have a favorite vacation place that brings back memories of when you and your family were together. Think about it. Time together on family vacations creates stronger bonds. Again, I think we would all agree on that. I think most people see that the same thing can also take place in family businesses. Because you see, the family business becomes part of the family history. A lot of time that the family spends together is spent building and running that business. The family is bound by a common struggle, a common goal, shared victories, and success. And on the other hand, they share common fears, failures, and setbacks as well. But few things bring closeness like working together to achieve a common goal. So, family businesses can build their success on the fact that they have a long-term attitude that basically says, you're family, and we're always going to be family. And the fact that the family has a chance to bind itself together in the pursuit of a common goal builds solidarity in that company. In fact, companies that aren't family businesses try desperately to achieve this same level of closeness and teamwork, or at least they try to promote the image of this kind of closeness. We often hear so many people at innovative companies say, we're just like a family. Or we hear soldiers say that they go to war with their brothers and sisters. They draw attention to the fact that they share a binding common goal to show strength and solidarity. Well, family businesses have this naturally, and there's really something to that. But in the case of the family business, they're really your family. So you don't want to hurt the business in any way because you're going to see these people again, and you're going to see them often. At family gatherings, holidays, weddings, they're going to be there. So you don't want to be the family scourge that wrecked something that your mom and dad or your aunt and uncle built. I mean, it's one thing if an executive at a publicly held firm gets greedy, but it's another thing entirely to mess up your family. Very few people are willing to make a mistake or commit a transgression that might cause them to be disowned by the family. You see, there's also more at stake in a family business than just money. There's the family name. There's a sense of leaving a family legacy to your children and your grandchildren, the family reputation, the family pride. And this sense of connection to the business incentivizes the family leaders to make decisions that put the company in good shape in the future. That way, it can be handed down to future generations. And by doing this, the family name can be remembered and it can be known for many years to come. And as a result, the legacy can continue to grow. Think about it. How many people do you think associate themselves more strongly with their company name than with their family name? I'll bet most people care more about being a Smith, a Jones, or a Davis than they do about being related to IBM, Coca-Cola, or Microsoft. I don't think too many people would argue that people are more concerned with the future of their children and their grandchildren than they are with the future of the company they work for. But with family businesses, these two things get bound up together. You see, the future of your business is the future of your family. Its success is connected to your family's success in an interesting way. And this could be a huge motivator for you and your family to really pay attention to the business and to really pay attention to your customers. I bet if you ask most people about their great-great-grandparents, they probably know very little about them. Heck, they probably don't even know their names. But ask a Rockefeller, and I bet they could tell you tales about the family for hours over drinks. Simply put, long-term orientation in business is the surest way to build wealth, and family businesses often have this in abundance. Many times, family businesses don't have to manage by the quarter or even worry about stockholder returns. They can afford to make good decisions that may take a while to play out, but that will benefit the company in the long run. You see, they're focusing on building a legacy, and that plays into the minds of consumers as well. People tend to trust companies that sound like their family businesses, and there are reasons why businesses do well with names like Johnson & Sons Plumbing or Miller's Plumbing. We trust companies with family names. We believe in the stories that we've heard about what the company stands for and where it comes from. Think about it. We believe we'll get good service at a Marriott hotel because, well, Bill Marriott seems to mean it. And we get an extra kick out of a Mickey Mouse cartoon because Walt Disney put a lot of himself into the creation of that little guy. Some of you might even drive a Ford because your grandfather owned a Model T. And we have an inherent trust that Bill Marriott and Walt Disney and Henry Ford would want their families to keep doing things the right way, and that the family will want to live up to that legacy, that there's honor that comes with carrying that name. Now, another strength of family businesses are that they're typically more resilient than other companies. When the company hits hard times or goes through an economic downturn, a family will sacrifice and work together to make it through the tough time. Family members lean on each other and pull together, and the business benefits from that devotion. Maybe they've learned to do that in their personal lives, and they've carried that over into the practice of the business. I mean, if you trust your mom and dad in your personal life, then you can bring that foundation into the business and be more willing to trust them with business decisions. Now, that can also be said of the opposite, but we're going to get to that in a little bit. So let's think of a few examples. E&J Gallo, Porsche, and Ritz-Carlton are all world-renowned companies that got started during the Great Depression. They were started during tough times, and they were resilient. The families who started these companies persevered, and the companies have endured. So, there are a lot of good things about family business. Indeed, there are a lot of benefits to starting your business with your family and working to build it together. But there can also be a dark side to it too. Now, some of these things we mentioned briefly earlier in the course, but let's take a minute to take a closer look. And let's see what we can do to avoid the pitfalls. Some family businesses really struggle when they get passed on to future generations. I've seen statistics that say that only 30% of family businesses make it to a second generation, and only 10% make it to the third generation. Often, second and third generation family members may work in the business, but they might not put as much effort into it as their elders did. Sure, they draw a paycheck, but they don't necessarily earn it. And when non-family members carry the weight and don't get rewarded for keeping the company afloat, it won't take long before nepotism destroys it. I see this a lot where I'm from. Southern Indiana is the limestone capital of the world. The Empire State Building and other national landmarks were built with Indiana limestone that was excavated from many family-owned quarries. There was an industry of small and family-owned businesses that worked these quarries. Now, unfortunately, many of those quarries have gone out of business because the descendants lived lifestyles that were much more lavish than the company founders had. There's an old saying in the limestone industry that comes out, and it says, the grandfather starts the business, the children grow the business, and the grandchildren bankrupt the business. Now, I'd say that this saying seems to support the statistics I just mentioned. The best family businesses avoid this fate by giving relatives specific job titles and specific responsibilities. You see, family members should not play by a different set of rules than the other employees or the other managers. I mean, it's one thing to groom a family member for a leadership position. That makes sense. After all, the family member has been getting on-the-job training since they were a little kid. But it's another thing entirely to put someone in a leadership position just because they're family. You want to make the management lines crystal clear. Being in the family shouldn't trump your lines of management. This means that family members can't reprimand non-family members who may outrank them. And family members can't reprimand employees that don't answer to them. If this happens, it's not going to be long before dissension starts to take place throughout the ranks. But as I've made clear earlier, there are still many family businesses that don't collapse. They grow into big professional organizations. And yet, many families have been torn apart because of business success. Sometimes, this is due to disagreements in the family about inheritance. Sometimes, battles even happen between siblings as to who should run the business if mom or dad dies. But these problems can be avoided if your family business has a succession strategy. Now, this is really, really important. If you've built a family business, you need to have in place a succession strategy. And that's a plan that lays out what happens to your company if leadership dies. So, who will run the company and what roles will everyone play in the new post-parent version? Some family members avoid doing this because they simply feel like they're just too busy to deal with it, or they don't want to make anyone angry with what they decide the future organization is going to look like. But you need to think about this issue because you don't want your family members to have to deal with it during a time of crisis should something happen to you. Dealing with family business issues during a time of death, divorce, or sickness is a horrible experience for everyone involved. So, the family business leaders need to sit down with their attorneys, with the spouses, and get their board together and hammer out a good succession strategy. It needs to be one that addresses the many possible scenarios that could pop up at any time. If this isn't done and the unexpected does happen, I've seen families destroyed, and the businesses can lose that human touch that made them so special. Let me tell you a story about a family business that's gone through this same scenario back in my home area. Before Disneyland opened in 1955, there was a theme park in southern Indiana called Santa Claus Land. Santa Claus Land opened in 1946. It was started by a retired industrialist named Lewis Cook. It was a free park which had a Santa Claus that families could visit, and it also had a toy shop, a restaurant, and children's rides. Over time, the park was taken over by Lewis's son, Bill Cook Sr. In the following years, Bill continued to add to the park. In fact, he added the first Jeep go-around ever manufactured, and he added a new restaurant. He even added a deer farm that became home to 14 European white fallow deer. Now, I think that's pretty cool. Well, since its opening, the park has stayed in the ownership of the Cook family. Lewis Cook passed on to his son, Bill Cook Sr., and Bill Cook Sr. passed it on to his son, Will Cook. And over the years, it's been changed from being Santa Claus Land to being Holiday World. My friends who work at the Walt Disney Company say it's a very well-respected park in the industry. They built some good rides and offer one of the cleanest and friendliest theme parks in the world. Now that all sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, that was true until the unexpected happened not too long ago. That's when Will Cook died suddenly from drowning in the family swimming pool. And Will's death was a total shock. People thought he would be running that park for a long time, so there really were no plans for what would happen if he died. Will's ownership share went to his wife, and that makes sense. I mean, that's to be expected, right? But now it gets a little bit more complicated. Since blood relatives had always run the park, Will's brother Dan took over as president of Holiday World. But Will's widowed wife wanted her part of the family to run the park. So lawsuits engaged, and Will's widowed son won, and Dan was fired, and a former general manager of the park was put in place as its new president by the company's board. It was a long, drawn-out process, and it was in the newspapers and industry trade magazines for a long time. The once great feel-good story about a family-owned business turned into one being about betrayal and fighting. The Cook name will never be the same in our area ever again. Now, it looks like Holiday World is going to come out okay in the long run, but it did put a dent in the company's strategy while things were getting worked out. There are a lot of lessons that we've learned in this lecture that can be found in this example. There's a successful family business, started and successfully passed down to a third generation. It was a well-respected organization in the local community and in the larger industry that it was a part of. It was a great success story, and for decades, it brought happiness to people who visited that park. And I'm sure the family was thrilled to have it as their family legacy. But you also see some of the things that you need to look out for. And more than anything, you need a good succession strategy in place at all times. A good succession strategy with all the key players at the table could have prevented the drama that I just told you about. But let's take a look at a few more of the common pitfalls for people starting and running family businesses. I mentioned earlier the benefits of working with family and the bonds that it can create as you build something together. But there can be a drawback with this as well. It's important that you have clearly defined boundaries between the world of your business and the world of your family life. You see, it's easy for families to spend all their time working or talking about the business. Say you're celebrating a family member's birthday, grilling out in the backyard. It's going to be easy to carry on a discussion about work that you'd already started at the office earlier in the week. Now, that's not always a good idea because mixing business and home life can be taxing and it can be problematic. So, I recommend that you limit business discussions to the office or at business-sponsored events whenever you can. It will help you create a boundary between work and personal life, and it's going to give everyone a well-deserved break. You also want to put business roles in writing. Too many family businesses bring family members in with no clear plan on what they're going to contribute and what they're going to receive in return for their contributions. You need to make this clear from day one. This will help you avoid any misunderstandings or hard feelings down the road. Now, the Cook story is a little depressing, isn't it? But I'd like to share a happier family business story from Southern Indiana. It's about the family business I was involved in when I was a young man. About 20 years ago, my Uncle Les asked me if I wanted to help him build a business. He wanted to open a golf course. And since you're interested in entrepreneurship, I think you're going to love the story behind how my Uncle Les came up with the idea for this golf course. It's a classic tale of true entrepreneurship. It's comprised of bootstrapping, hard work, and risk. You see, my Uncle Les worked third shift as a maintenance worker at the local General Motors foundry. It was a good job, and over time he was able to buy up a lot of property around his house. It was beautiful farmland in the rolling hills outside Mitchell, Indiana. At some point, he started to take a liking to golf, but there was a problem. The closest golf course was 20 miles away. So he used to go out in his cow pasture and he would go out there and hit golf balls. Now, it wasn't long before other people drove by Les's property and saw him hitting balls out there. So other people started to go out there and they wanted to hit golf balls too. Well, that was pretty cool. People really enjoyed having a place nearby to hit golf balls. But then my Uncle Les got an idea of how to make it more fun. He went out and bought some green flags and bucket pails. He got everyone together at the gate of the cow pasture and showed them a piece of paper. And on that paper, he had a hand-drawn layout of the golf course that he had created that everyone was going to play that day. It was a homemade layout. There were 9 buckets set out on the course and 9 flags. The buckets marked where the tees were, and the flags marked where the greens were. So, everyone that showed up played the homemade course, and they loved it. It wasn't long before he'd have 20 or 30 people out there on a Saturday afternoon playing his cow pasture golf course. Then one day, when my dad and I were playing with my Uncle Les, he had his Field of Dreams moment. You remember that movie, right? It's the one where Kevin Costner hears that voice off in the distance. If you build it, they will come. Now, Uncle Les looked at us and said, we ought to do this for real. I'm going to turn this pasture into a real golf course. So, the next day, Uncle Les ordered a golf course construction manual from the PGA, and he absorbed that book, and it wasn't long before he went out and bought a bulldozer, a dump truck, and a backhoe. Uncle Les was all in. So, with the help of family and fellow workers from the General Motors plant, my Uncle Les turned that pasture into a real golf course. Now, Uncle Les couldn't pay the helpers money, but he did give those people who helped a lifetime membership to the course. But they were more than happy to help. My uncle's vision of turning that pasture into a course seemed crazy to a lot of people in town, but it did happen. The buckets became elevated tee boxes. The flags were in the middle of the real greens that met PGA standards, and for the first time, there were fairways where the pastures used to be. When we first opened the course, all we had was a makeshift gravel parking lot for customers to park in. Our clubhouse was a picnic table between the parking lot and the first tee. Uncle Les had to put a lot of his own money into the construction equipment and the golf course supplies. Even though he kept construction costs down by using free sweat, building the tees and greens were expensive. Grass, sand, gravel, and fertilizers ran $5,000 to $10,000 per tee box, and greens would run an average of $40,000 in materials. But eventually, as more golfers came out, Uncle Les had enough cash flow to justify building a real clubhouse and a real cart shack next to the parking lot. It's one of the most satisfying and fun things I've ever been a part of. Now, it was long, hard work, but it was worth it. We were building something together, and we were doing it as a family. My dad even later joined the staff and helped out when he retired. And I think that was the greatest thing about the whole experience. I got to know my Uncle Les and Aunt Joanne and other people in my family a lot more through the process of working there. It gave me a common place to share work and play with my aunt and uncle and my mom and dad. You really get to know someone well when you're putting in long hours doing something productive together. At the end of the day, that's what makes family business so special. And that's why so many go on to be such big successes. We threw our heart and soul into that business. And I have wonderful memories of the days digging, grooming, and building that course with my family. In this lecture, we took a closer look at the pros and cons of starting a family business. In a way, it's just like starting any other type of business. And like any business, there are risks and there are rewards. But there are a few key differences and a few more snags that can bring challenges your way. We also saw that the Cook family in Santa Claus Land had big problems. And that's just one story of many out there. Stories like that pop up every day. There's no toolkit item for today's lecture, but since so many people think about starting family businesses, I thought it'd be an important topic to cover in this course. But if you really want to start a business with your family, I'd encourage you to do it. Family businesses have done a lot for this country. In many ways, building a family business represents some of the most fundamental values driving the American dream. And as we've seen, there are some real benefits to starting a family business. Families are more resilient, and they'll work harder to stick together. Families are in it for the long haul. The success of the business is intertwined with the family's security. And families care about their businesses like they care about their own legacies. They hope to pass them along to their children and grandchildren. To build your business on these foundations, all you have to do is be aware of some of the pitfalls that you might encounter and take a few steps along the way to avoid them. After building the golf course in Indiana with my Uncle Les and the rest of my family, I can understand why families devote so much time and energy to these businesses. Because a family business often becomes so much more than a business. You see, it's about more than money. It's about pride, and it's about love. And it's amazing how much can get done in the world when you have people working together toward a common goal. The tradition of family business is one reason that we have so many incredible companies based in this country. And who knows, maybe your company will leave a legacy for future generations too.